welcome back to the Ghoul Guide Association, the super, super duper secret society where we talk about all things Gothic and pop culture. We are, as ever, your Ghoul Guides. My name is Lauren.
And I'm Mary.
And did you know that August is Women in Translation Month?
I did know that because you told me that
Because
it
I
was.
told you. I did.
But tell us, Lauren, how are we
Yeah.
going to celebrate Women in Translation Month?
So, yeah, last night when I saw on Threads that it was Women in Translation Month, I thought, wow, we read a lot of women in translation, and we should do a bit of a recommendations episode for those of you that are perhaps looking to get a little bit more translated fiction into your TBR, and also spotlight some of the brilliant female authors and translators in this sphere, because I think in recent years, women's fiction in particular has been really dominating the translated kind of literary space. I think this year's Booker Prize, International Booker Prize winner, is a woman. I have slight issues with the Booker Prize in general. I don't always love Booker Prize winner novels. But I do love a lot of translated fiction. So I, next to me, have a stack of some of my favourites. And I've tried to also get a couple of different kind of like formats, a different, like, they're all Gothic, but slightly different genres, so that if you are looking for something to add to your list for Women in Translation Month, you can hopefully pick something from this. So yeah, hopefully there'll be a little bit of something for everyone. And I also think that you've not read some of these.
Ooh.
Some of them you definitely have. But I'm hoping that some of them might also be new to you as well, Mary. So I'm going to start with The Midnight Shift by Chon Son Ran. This is translated by Jean Ng, or Wen. I think it might be Jean Wen. It's PNG. So forgive me if I'm wrong there or right there. But yeah, so this is a cult Korean novel, and it is essentially about a young woman who has a little bit of a traumatic past. She is a detective on a Seoul police force, and she comes across a series of what seems to be suicides, but they're very suspicious. There's no blood at the scenes. There's maybe something kind of strange or culty going on. And it starts to center around a care facility, a hospital, in an increasingly dilapidated region of the city that wants to be updated. And this hospital's kind of this lingering leftover, and it houses 2 wards of elderly people, including her sort of adopted grandmother, and she starts to become increasingly obsessed with this case. So as Soo-yeon, our detective, is having these niggling concerns, she's, something's not quite right, she meets another young woman called Violette. And Violette is a vampire hunter.
Okay, because
and over the course
when you said that there was no blood at the crime scene, that's immediately where my brain went. I was like, is this a vampire thing?
Yeah. Yes. So this is a vampire novel, but it's maybe not a vampire novel in the way that you've ever come across it before. Generically, this is a very interesting novel. So Violette is a Korean-French adoptee, and over the course of the 2 narratives, so we have the present in Seoul, and then we have the past in France, and we learn about Violette's first encounter with a vampire. If you are looking for something that is Gothic in the truest sense of being about the human condition and our anxieties, has a bit of mystery, has a bit of darkness, but isn't gory, isn't scary, is more contemplative. If you're looking for something queer, if you're looking for something that really challenges the way we think about vampirism and about human identity and who we are, then I would really, really recommend this novel to you. The way that the vampires work is quite interesting. In some ways, they are classical vampires. They've got all the, normal traits of a vampire. They're very compelling, they're very beautiful. They're, at the one sense, really refined, but also very animalistic. And we have little bits of an almost kind of like an Anne Rice Coven style vampire thing going on. But then we have, what's happening in this hospital. And we also have a lot of exploration about age and meaning and being left behind. And Seoul works really well here as a setting because it's an area that is, people are desperate to gentrify it and renovate it and update it. But there's this dilapidated hospital that is literally housing the left behinds of society. So the grandmother figure, her own children have left, they've moved abroad. Suyona, detective, has no parents herself. And we have this kind of exploration of these connections and these bonds, but also this idea of what does it mean to have legacy? What does it mean to have a future? What does it mean to modernize? And all these different it's a very subtle, very soft, very quiet vampire novel in a lot of ways. But that's not to say that it doesn't use the vampire of it really well. So it's very much a vampire novel. The vampire of it all is really, really important. But this isn't a romance in the way that something like Interview with a Vampire is a romance. It's romantic in the sense of it's bittersweet and it's nostalgic and it's contemplative. So yeah, if you're looking for something that is paced a bit differently, that if you're a little bit squeamish, if you're looking for something that's got those gothic elements but not the horror elements, then I would highly recommend The Midnight Shift, because it's a really unique vampire novel. So, if you are looking
Can I just say, I love that. As you know, I love everything to do with vampires, and I love it finding new kind of either interpretations or cultural traditions of vampires. So that sounds absolutely fabulous, and yeah, I excellent recommendation.
I think you will like this.
I might have to borrow it off of you.
Yeah, I think it's almost like the antithesis of the wholesome Asian literature trend of something like the Dalagut Dream Store or When the Coffee Gets Cold, those types of novels that are designed to kind of fill that hole that modern life leaves behind. It's written into the same tradition, but it's kind of twisting it. You don't leave feeling negative. It is still quite I would say classically Korean book in that sense, but it has this kind of almost sharp edge to it that just really works. So yeah, I think you'll really like this because it has that style, but it does something very different with it. Okay, so if you are looking for some short stories, I have got 2 recommendations for you if you're thinking, I want something that is weird and unsettling, but doesn't fully deep dive into the horror side of the Gothic. I have got 2 recommendations for you. I have got, which I know we have both read, Mariana Enriquez, who is an Argentinian writer, and I've specifically chosen Things We Lost in the Fire. She currently has 3 short story collections and a full-length novel called Our Share of Night. I will confess I'm only halfway through Our Share of Night because it's a really big book and it's too big to read in the bath, where I do most of my reading. But Enriquez is a writer who uses the Gothic, I feel like, in the same way that the 18th century writers used the Gothic, to scratch at the surface of very real corruption, violence, human evil, uses the supernatural as a mirror to hold up to society. And if you know anything about Argentina, which I suspect many of you do after the World Cup, if you know anything about Argentina in the 20th and 21st century, then you probably will know why the Gothic is such a useful mirror to use for a writer like Enriquez, and she uses the Gothic mode to explore the lived reality of a dictatorship, of a violent, unfair regime in a very mundane but very troubling and unsettling way. That I think is most on display and most. I think if you like the Gothic and you like to be unsettled, but you don't want to go too far, then Things We Lost in the Fire is more for you than perhaps The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. I think the stories in that one are a little bit darker. And this was also very much inspired by Latin America's version of the Me Too movement in the mid 2010s. So yeah, if you're looking for something feminist, something unsettling, something Gothic in the true female Gothic sense of it, then I would highly recommend this one. Do you want to add anything on there? Because I know that you have also read this one.
Yeah, no. All I'd say is I enjoyed all of the stories in the two collections of hers that I have. I haven't got the newest one yet, just simply because I
It literally
don't.
just
It's
came
just
out a
come,
few months
yeah.
ago.
And there's too many books that I keep buying, and I need to stop buying books. I do have a really beautiful hardback copy of her novel, which I also have not read
Same.
because it's so
It's
big, it's
massive.
massive, and I'm like, I'm like, it's nice, and I'm glad that I have a hardback and not paperback, because I think that would also be difficult to read. But I should,
Yes.
yeah, I think both of us should
Yeah.
maybe, I don't know,
Yeah, I'm halfway through it and I do
yeah,
like it, and it is really stark. It's about a supernatural elite cult.
yeah,
It made me think of it when you talked about Ready or Not
yeah,
in
yeah,
our
yeah,
last So You Don't Like Color On. It really made me think of it. But this one, as you can see if you're watching the video, it's short stories. It's about 150 pages. It's the perfect size for a Uniqlo crescent bag, which if you're a millennial like me, you probably have one. And I should say this was translated by Megan McDowell. So both a female writer and a female translator. So a really great
yeah.
women in translation piece of Latin American Gothic there. So my second one is Flowers of Mold by Ha Songnyan. And this is translated by Janet Hong. So again, women translator, women author. And I do find it interesting that women tend to translate women, and I think it is really important. I don't like to be a gender essentialist, but I think there is something about a translator needing to understand a certain amount of the perspective of the writer. And that's why I think it is often important when like queer writers translate queer authors and things like that. But similar to Enriquez, Ha Song-yan, so the blurb puts it really well. On the surface, these stories seem pleasant enough, yet there's something disturbing just below the surface, ready to permanently disrupt the characters' lives. So, again, this is very much about mundane, everyday lives where something is wrong. If you like the uncanny and the unheimlich, and you like that kind of real 20th century Gothic weirdness of like something out of the corner of my eye is wrong, something under the surface is wrong, something is not quite right, and that very domestic, modern, in this case, very urban setting, I would highly recommend this book. It is a little bit harder to get hold of, but Waterstones do have it. That's where I got it from. So if you're in the UK, you can get it from Waterstones. It is published by Open Letter, which is, I believe, a university press like fiction imprint. So I think all the translators are scholars, which is also really interesting. But yeah, this is 10 stories. Similar to Enriquez, has that very kind of like something's just not quite right, and it leaves you with that weirdness, and the more you think about it, the more disturbing they get. So if you are looking for something that, if you're a bit squeamish, if you're a bit like me with the horror films, and that applies to your reading as well, both Things We Lost in the Fire and Flowers of Mold highly recommended. They also both look really beautiful on your bookshelf because they've both got really intriguing covers.
That is half of it, isn't it? I mean, I think it's important,
Yeah.
especially in this episode, to be like the authors are amazing and the translators are amazing. Translation
Mm-hmm.
is a really important art in and of itself, but also
Yes.
like cover art. Cover art is so important. I have bought books
Mm-hmm.
before just purely based on the cover, and I think knowing that you've got somebody
Yeah.
either who are like someone's chosen an image, or they
Yeah.
have created a new image specifically for this piece of work, I think it's just a really beautiful
Yeah.
addition to like this author translator
Yeah.
partnership as well. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're watching, you can probably see there's the cover for this has all these different kind of like spores and obviously flowers of mold. And I just really liked how it makes really normal things really uncomfortable, this book,
Yeah,
like these short
yeah.
stories. That kind of really like, oh, that's a bit, you know, it leaves you thinking about them. So also what's really nice about both of these is if you've got like a bus journey or a train journey or you're just going for a coffee or some lunch, you can just read one of them and then you can put it back down again and then pick it up again and put it back down again.
Yeah.
So they are my sort of like strange Gothic short story recommendations. I do have another short story recommendation for you. This is not for the faint-hearted. So this is Cursed Bunny. And Cursed Bunny is a short story collection by Bo Ra Chung. And this is translated by Anton He. The first story in this collection is about a sort of Frankensteinian creature made from excrement that climbs out of the toilet and harasses its creator and then eventually seeks to kind of take over its place.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. It's so the way that it's described in the blurb cover is like magical realism meets horror, and I think that is the best way to describe it because it has that kind of like mundane, like it's not bystander horror necessarily. I know I've talked about that before, but it's some of these stories are really upsetting in that way that makes you really want to keep reading. Absolutely not if you are squeamish. Like this is the I hadn't fully I'd seen this getting some praise. I was like, oh, literature and translation, another short story collection. I love a short story collection, particularly by a woman. I'll pick this up. And I read that first story on my lunch break and I was like, you know what? I'm going to put this down. I'm going to pick it back up at another time.
I think
because
it's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's like when you buy like an album, the way I love listening to full albums because I think the song choice is curated especially for the listener. And it's the same with short story collections. The story order is curated especially for you. And yes, you can dip in and out and read bits, but when you're first reading it and you read it like from start to finish, that first one is like a punch and it grabs you or it doesn't. And if you don't like that first story, you might not read the rest. And it also sets the tone. So it is interesting that, when assembling this, she chose to put a story about a shit Frankenstein monster.
Yeah. Basically, so it starts out. So this is literally, it's called, the first story is called The Head. And the first paragraph is, she was about to flush the toilet. Mother. She looked back. There was a head popping out of the toilet, calling for her. Mother. The woman looked at it for a moment. Then she flushed the toilet. The head disappeared in a rush of water. She left the bathroom.
Yeah.
And it is essentially this very Frankensteinian relationship between this thing in the toilet that grows and changes, and you then follow her through her life, and then at the end, I mean, this, it's a short story, so it's not necessarily a spoiler, but essentially she's older, she's given her life to her child, to her natural born child, and this young version of her climbs out of the toilet and is basically like, you need to get in the toilet now, it's your turn. Like, it's this really visceral, bizarre horror. Magical realism is exactly the right term for it. So yeah, if you want something, if you're like, no, I want the real unsettling, can't read this over dinner, translated fiction, Cursed Bunny is for you. It's one of the weirdest short story collections I have read. And yeah, it's just, it takes the Gothic in that very, like, the things that are taboo, not because they are like morally or ethically wrong, but because we just don't like talking about them because they're gross.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to address it. Very much in that one. My second, so technically this is my fifth recommendation, but my second in the sort of like, actually you do want to be viscerally upset, is The Unworthy.
Okay.
By Augustina Batzariga, which you might be familiar with her name because she wrote Tender is the Flesh, which is a dystopian cannibalism novel. I believe she is also Argentinian. Yes, also Argentinian. I didn't intentionally pick two Argentinian authors for my Latin American picks, but I did realize that most of the Mexican authors that I read write in English. They don't write in Spanish.
Yeah,
not that Argentina and Mexico are the only two. The only two countries in Latin America, obviously far more. But like, you know, Isabel Allende, like a lot of the Latin authors that I read, I actually don't read them in translation, and I not fully clicked that until I was looking on my bookshelf. This is another dystopia. So in some ways very similar to Tender is the Flesh, but also very, very different. If you read Tender is the Flesh and you didn't like it, you probably won't like this because this goes even harder. If you read it and you loved it, I think you'll really like this. This is a novel set in a strange, kind of polluted dystopia in a place called the House of the Sacred Sisterhood, where these women are living in this sort of pseudo-Catholic convent scenario where you have these like blinded, tortured saints. I don't want to say too much about it because I feel like it, as you can see, it's quite a short, it's almost more of a novella, and saying too much would give too much of the reading experience away. It's violent, it's gross, but in that way that is really compelling. If you don't like horror, you won't like this. But if you like that kind of really Gothic violence that doesn't kind of
visceral but not gratuitous.
It's not violent. Yes, thank you. That's exactly the word I was trying to pick out of the air. It was gratuitous. Yeah, it's a really off-putting book that makes you want to keep turning the page.
Well,
so if you like stories,
as we've been talking about in our Saints series, the lives of saints are often quite violent, not in a gratuitous way, and not in a kind of perverted way, but in a genuinely like visceral way. And
this is very much inspired by that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's very culty. It's got real kind of like Catholic Orthodox overtones. You've got the dystopia of it all. You've got people just being awful. Like, what she does a lot as a writer is, and it's weird because I don't like Cormac McCarthy for this same reason, but I do like this, is that kind of like the horrendous people that we become when horrendous things happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's very sort of like insightful on the reality of, in those dystopian situations, what happens to people. And again, like with Enriquez, there's something really stand out about the fact that this is an Argentinian writer who has lived, I think she's slightly younger maybe than Enriquez, but like who has lived at least in the aftermath of a dictatorship that was very much about consumption and class and elitism. And I'm not going to go too much into the whole Peron military coup, all of the Argentinian everything, but compared to a lot of modern regimes, the Argentinian one stands out because there was such a clear ruling elite, and people's bodies were literally, in a sense, consumed for the maintenance of it. So whereas Tender of the Flesh was very much about that idea of human consumption, this is more about the suffering that we inflict upon ourselves and then the suffering that we inflict upon other people. I had to put this down a couple of times because it's so like intense. But if you like this type of thing, you'll absolutely love The Unworthy. Okay, and then my final recommendation, I've decided to go for Hooked by Asako Yuzuki, translated by Polly Barton. Now, you might recognize those names because Yuzuki wrote Butter, and Polly Barton was also the translator. And I specifically bought this Waterstone special edition because it had a whole essay in it from Barton about the translation. And that's one of the reasons I chose to include it over Sayaka Murata's work, because the essay about translation in this and why Barton chose the words she chose to maintain the essence of this book into English is really, really interesting. So for a Women in Translation Month recommendation, it had to be Hooked. Now, Butter, as you might remember from our recommendation and review, was about a journalist who becomes kind of obsessed with a possible female serial killer, and food is very important in that novel. Hooked is about a young woman called Eriko who is living a very pristine but very controlled life. Eriko still lives with her parents and basically only manages this level of pristineness because her mother is still mothering her. So she works for a company, and basically her job is fish. She's like a buyer for seafood and things like that.
Her job is fish.
So Hooked, her job is fish.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, like in the you've not seen the Barbie movie, so that might not be a reference to you, but like
yeah.
Oh, you have.
Like,
yeah. So in the same way that
some people's job is speech, and for her it's fish. Yeah.
Her job is fish. Yeah, exactly. She is single. She has this very pristine life. She has a very specific routine. She becomes obsessed with this anti-housewife blogger called Shoko. And Shoko's whole thing is that she is a stay-at-home wife, but she doesn't have children. Her husband and her don't make that much money, and she's quite lazy. So she's kind of like this idea of this like anti-blog. Eriko essentially engineers them running into each other. And what follows is a very fraught friendship and a very fraught exploration of femininity, womanhood, female friendships and relationships. On the surface, I think you wouldn't necessarily think this is a Gothic novel. And some people might be like, oh, you're just slapping the label on everything. I think that any particularly millennial-aged woman who reads this, or anyone that like identifies with a more feminine identity, will read this and find it really unsettling in a totally different way to some of these ones. There were moments of this where I would read passages and I'd be like, oh fuck, that hits so hard, like so close to the bone. It's such a raw, in the same way that Butter was, it's such a raw examination of not only what makes women women, but the potential women have to be monstrous in the way that modern society makes us. And it just, it's not supernatural, there's nothing necessarily violent. You do have some real kind of like unhinged moments, but I think this is a really Gothic story in the sense of this is an unflinching, very real look. And on the one hand, you're like, this is unrealistic. And on the other hand, you're like, fuck my life, I could totally see this happening.
Well, even just the thing that you said about how she engineered meeting this woman who had this online presence. I have read stories about that
Yeah.
happening to people in their
Parasocial
own lives.
relationships.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And I think I would love
Mm-hmm.
to do more work into this, but I'm I'm not an academic, so the work that I do, um I don't know that I would. Maybe we can pursue this in our podcast. Maybe this is the best
Yeah.
platform for it. But
Hey,
like,
we're academics because we choose
yeah,
to be academics.
I
Because we
think
have the degree that makes us
I
academics.
think the idea of like everyday horror, everyday gothic,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to,
Yeah.
and I started thinking about this term when the Me Too movement and the everyday sexism movement
Mm-hmm.
was happening, because I think
Yeah.
there is actually something that is terrifying about everyday existence, whether it's you're existing as a woman and you're terrified about going into a cab or going into an alley at night, or you're existing
Mm-hmm.
as a person of color and you're worried about going into a shop, or being racially abused on a bus, or perhaps you're trans, or you maybe don't present in a gender conforming way, and it's
Yeah.
the horror that you feel, going into a public bathroom, or even just that build up, and there's the same, and even like the online horror, because online spaces offer this,
Mm-hmm.
creeping sense of, it's not just famous people that get stalked online, or who have the,
Yeah.
it's this whole plethora of people who are having these
Mm-hmm.
normal everyday experiences that are nonetheless horrific and gothic infused. And I think that kind of, whether it's real stories, whether it's fiction, a blending of the two, I think is a really interesting genre. I would call it a genre, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
like a mode or something, I don't know. But yeah, I think that it is capturing
Yeah.
that experience, that everyday experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Like there's a bit, essentially there's a whole plot line around Shoko's blog and whether or not Shoko is going to become like a blogger, and she's making a little bit of money from it, and she goes to this event, and you basically end up having this situation that happens where like she's conscious of the way that Eriko is behaving towards her and how unhinged it is, but she doesn't realize she starts then behaving in this way to this other woman. And there's just so many, in the same way that Butter really was, yeah, like an everyday horror. Like both of these novels do a really good example of what happens when a woman chooses to like have comfort almost in her body. There's a lot of repulsion from particularly the male co-workers in both novels around the changes to the female main characters, like appearances and things like that. um I think if you are looking for something that is gothic but is not supernatural, is not, in any way like horror-y, but is horrifying, Hooked is absolutely for you, especially if you liked Butter. But also I think Butter has suffered from being slightly misrepresented and missold as a sort of murder thriller. This is just a really uncomfortable, savage insight into womanhood. And it's one of those novels where you're reading something, cringing, thinking, oh my God, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. But you also know that you would probably do that too. And it is that real kind of like just razor sharp analysis. And it's also a really pretty book.
It is.
Both Butter and Hooked have got beautiful graphic design, and Polly Barson's a fantastic translator. I would just recommend reading her essay, if nothing else. It's really interesting the way that she manages to capture ideas and emotions and phrases that we just don't have in English, that exist in Japanese. She does it very, very well, and it is quite a skill. I mean, obviously translation is a skill, but I think particularly this kind of very, subtle being like, hey, well, this is the one for one translation, but this doesn't make sense, or it doesn't quite have the same feeling. And she really thinks about even things of like, oh, well, do I translate this as like dad or father or dad? Like, fantastic example of translation. So those are my 6 Women in Translation Month recommendations for you. If you have read any of these, please let us know. If you do pick them up, let us know what you think. And Mary, let me know which one you want me to bring for you first.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll have a think, because some of them sound very cool. But thank you so much, Lauren. I always love hearing about things that you've read, and especially if you've read it and you think that it's good and worth recommending to someone. I'm like, yes, this has to be good. So yeah, thank you very much. And also, I guess, to everyone listening and watching, if you have any recommendations that you want to make from your own favorite women in translation authors and books, then let us know.
Yeah, because there are some great ones like women in translation are having a real moment. So I actually just got the email this morning to say that my copy of, let me get this right, it is called Medea Sang Me a Corrido by Dalia de la Cerda, which is a Mexican novel, and it is a Mexican punk retelling of Medea, the Greek myth.
Love that.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of like Polish translation that's coming through at the moment that's really interesting. So yeah, if you have any recommendations, please let us know. I can't remember the name of the publisher, but there's that publisher that puts out those blue covers.
I was going to say, actually, give me 1 second, let's pause. Okay, just like magic, here we go. This
exactly.
is I'm not going to pronounce this name because I will mispronounce it, but this book, Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead, and the publisher is a very fancy publisher, ZF? Is it ZF? What publisher is this?
Yeah, so if you're listening and not watching,
Fitzcarraldo Editions. And all of the books look like this.
So Fitzcarraldo.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're these deep blue with white stylized text, and they are very stark and they're very minimalist. They have been putting out some fantastic translated work
I
recently.
have been meaning to recommend this to you for ages, so let's finish on this. My recommendation.
Bonus recommendation.
Yeah, it's very good. It's not a supernatural book, but it is very much about womanhood, and she's essentially, it follows this woman who is living near the kind of Czech border in Poland, and there's this spate of murders that start happening, and it's very, if you're vegan or vegetarian and you like reading those books where that is the focus of the characters and the narrative, then I think this is also a really good one for you. It's very unsettling, and who the murderer is, I think, is just really well constructed through that. Although that's not necessarily the most important part of the book. It is about womanhood, and that kind of this, living in this community, is very isolated community.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that I did add those because I was like, oh, it's the blue covers. Yeah. But there you go. Yeah. It was a good job I mentioned it. So yeah, send us your other recommendations because we're always on the lookout. And of course, in the meantime, stay safe and stay spooky.
Stay safe and stay spooky.